Hola, good morning, everybody. It's really lovely to be back here in Spain and in Madrid. I was very, very fortunate in my business career to have many reasons to visit Spain. For the last 10 years, I was managing director of Waitrose Supermarkets in the UK, and for the last 3, deputy chairman of John Lewis. So we had very positive dealings with El Corte Inglés and a number of other retail businesses in Spain. But also I had many occasions to enjoy your wonderful Rioja, Iberico ham, and all of the great food that you produce in Spain. And because of that, I'm very well aware of the links, particularly in agriculture and retailing, that exist between our two countries. Therefore, it is very important to me that very early on, after the vote on the 23rd of June, I came to Spain, and I'm delighted to have had very good meetings with Jaime, the previous trade minister, but also the reason for my visit here yesterday was to meet with Marisa, the new trade minister, and talk about how we continue the strong relationship between our two countries, and we had very productive talks. But I'm also delighted to be here this morning with all of you, and I'd like to thank Vox Populi and Ferrovial for organising this event and inviting me to speak. As we stand here in the Madrid Palace Hotel, I am reminded of the UK and Spain's shared history. This hotel, as you probably all know, was built as a personal favour to King Alfonso VIII of Spain in 1912. He having earlier married the Scottish-born Victoria Eugenie, whom he had met at Buckingham Palace. While there have been many royal intermarriages in our shared history, some more successful than others, thankfully our ties go well beyond that. The UK is the number one origin of tourists in Spain, with British sunseekers contributing over 1% of Spanish GDP every year. And it surprised me to learn, but may not be a surprise to you, that last year 9.6 million Brits holidayed in Spain in July alone. And it's not the ever-growing popularity of Iberian food in the UK that underpins much of modern-day Anglo-Spanish cultural relations. It's also, rather frustratingly, the regularity with which British football teams seem to lose to their Liga rivals. We fear the draw of the European Championship every year. But one of our strongest ties, I'm pleased to say, lies in trade, and that's where I'd like to focus this morning. I'll also talk about the UK government's priorities after the EU referendum and the global role I see Britain playing in the years ahead. My message today is simple. The UK is and will continue to be the most passionate advocate of global free trade. We will enhance trading ties east and west and place ourselves right at the centre of an increasingly interconnected world. The UK and Spain are major business partners. This year, bilateral trade stood at £40 billion. Spain is a top 10 market for UK exporters, and the UK is the third most important investor in Spain, representing 11% of Spanish total FDI stock. Vodafone, Stage, Bupa and Diageo, to name just a few, have an established presence here in Spain, employing, as the ambassador said, tens of thousands of people. And these ties are only going to get stronger. In a recent survey by the British Chamber of Commerce, more than half of British companies with operations in Spain say they plan to increase investment over the coming years. And it's a two-way street. The UK is the second most popular destination for Spanish investment, receiving over 60 billion in investment stock last year alone. With over 1,300 branches, Santander is a familiar sight on the UK High Street. And as the father of two daughters, aged 21 and 14, plenty of my money has gone to Inditex, where 100 clothing stores across the UK include Zara and Pull and Bear. And again, our bilateral ties are only going to get stronger. Iberdrola will invest 10 million into Scottish Power by 2020, and the automotive company Estamp West Midlands factory is expected to start production next year, safeguarding 800 jobs. But I know that there are some people in this room today who will think that the decision of the British people on June the 23rd puts all of this in jeopardy. Let me be clear. In our view, this is the wrong assumption. We are leaving the EU. We are not leaving Europe. The British people's decision was not to turn our backs on the world. It sought to take back control of our economic destiny. We owe our current standing on the world stage, our wealth and our high standards of living to our trading history. Britain has always been big thinking and internationalist. It would be mindless to be anything different in the future. While we remain a member of the EU, there will be no change to the terms on which we trade goods and services. And when we leave the Union, we will do so in a way that causes the minimal disruption to our European neighbours, with whom we want to maintain strong links across business, security, and culture. We now have the tools to make this happen. The new Department for International Trade will develop new trade and investment policy for the UK, including negotiating new trading arrangements with non-EU countries. From a blank slate, we have the opportunity to rebuild and strengthen our trading relationships with Europe and also with the rest of the world in a way that cuts bureaucracy and puts the needs of business at the heart of our trading future. But let me again be clear. We want the closest possible relationship with the EU on trade. It will be in every business's interest, whether here on the mainland or back in the UK, to have no dislocation of trade. The EU buys 44% of British exports and trades a surplus with the UK amounting to about £60 billion a year. Spain itself trades around a £9 billion surplus with the UK. Our economies and our supply chains are increasingly interlinked. Take Airbus, for example. The wings are made in South Gloucestershire in England. The tail fins here in Spain, in Getafe. Final assembly is in Toulouse, and the paint and interior work takes place in Hamburg. European car manufacturers have repeatedly told me how potential future tariffs on engines made in the UK, which are then shipped to the continent for final assembly, would be unwelcome. They would add costs for all European consumers. They would make the European car industry less competitive. And as the second biggest car exporter in Europe, Spain will understand this better than most. I therefore see it as a key part of my role as Minister for Trade Policy to ensure that the UK and European businesses do not face a cliff edge caused by a gap in our trading relationships. As a businessman of 33 years, I know that during times of change, trading continuity is of utmost importance. We must work pragmatically together to ensure continuity and consistency towards a new order. But government is not going to do this alone. That is why I've spent the months since the referendum meeting with over 300 businesses and business leaders and speaking to almost 2,000 in the UK and overseas to get an industry view of what a good deal looks like for Britain and for Europe. I've travelled to 21 countries. I've met over 25 trade ministers, 10 of whom are in the EU. And I've plenty more such meetings to come. Earlier this month, I was in Australia, Singapore, and Indonesia. From these conversations, several things have become very clear. Firstly, talk of a hard or soft Brexit or Britain replicating existing EU models misses the point. Businesses understand the need for trading continuity as we move towards a unique British model, one that makes our business environment even more competitive and protects both the UK and the EU's key industries. They also understand that while negotiating trade deals can be complex and time-consuming, Britain is in a unique position, having traded with Europe since Neolithic times. If you look at financial services and the issue of passporting, which will be a key issue in upcoming discussions, we feel that we are in a good place to achieve a sensible outcome around what is going to be best for all of Europe. After all, we're building on a relationship which has shared the same rules for so long and has huge economic integration. A bright trading future between the UK and the EU is very much possible if we proceed with pragmatism and common sense on all sides. It is this common sense that explains why global investors, from GSK to SoftBank to Nissan, see Britain as very much open for business. The World Bank continues to rank the UK as the highest major economy for ease of doing business. Our low tax, low regulation economy, fueled by some of the most skilled workers and the world's best universities, makes up our world-beating economic fundamentals. Since the referendum, we are still the fastest growing economy in the G7. We have a record number of people in employment, and retail sales are growing due to a rebound in customer confidence. The UK is and will remain a leading global economy. I've spoken about our bilateral ties and the steps we're taking post-referendum, but my final point is the role Britain will play as the most passionate advocate for global free trade. There has been a growing protectionist instinct in the global economy, so much so that the WTO, the World Trade Organization, has revised down its predictions for global trade next year. Everybody here knows the benefits of free trade. A competitive marketplace that provides cheaper and better goods to consumers, along with higher wages and more productive jobs. The flow of technology and ideas that benefit businesses. The opportunity for developing economies to trade their way to prosperity. We don't have to look far to see the benefits in action. The Spanish miracle is a testament to what liberalising your economy can do for your country. 20 years of a closed economy that brought economic stagnation and a deterioration in living standards across Spain was ended with the 1959 stabilisation plan. The plan saw Spain open up to foreign trade and encourage huge amounts of foreign investment. This ushered in a huge influx in global capital and technology, reinvigorating dormant industries such as automotive and shipbuilding. Standards of living increased dramatically, and Spain was then the fastest growing economy in the world. History is full of similar examples, such as when Spain opened its economy by joining the EEC in the 1980s. But recently, I went to South Korea, and I saw what I think is one of the best examples of closed and open societies. In 1949, North and South Korea started from a similar base, but are now poles apart. Seoul opened up to the world and is now a thriving democracy with exceptional living standards. Pyongyang did completely the opposite and is now one of the most restrictive and impoverished societies in the world. In South Korea, the GDP is 1.6 trillion. In the north, it's 40 billion. Over 80% of South Koreans have access to the internet. 0.1% of North Koreans do. And finally, if you live in South Korea, you'll live, on average, up to 10 years longer. While this is an extreme example, it shows that free trade is not just an economic issue, it's also a human one too. The success of our businesses and society are inextricably linked. I honestly believe that business is a force for good. In the UK, business collects the majority of taxes which go on to fund our vital public services. If we can set the global conditions that allow business to flourish, then the rising tide of trade will raise all boats. That is why the UK will lead the charge for global free trade and fight the battle against protectionism. And it's why we must win. While a member of the EU, we will continue to champion further liberalisation of the single market in services and the digital economy. We will also be a supportive voice in the ongoing EU trade deals, such as Mercosur and Japan. To succeed, we must update our current tariff-centric thinking about free trade. Tariffs are gradually being eliminated. If you look at the Canadian free trade deal, CETA, it's 98% tariff-free. The more significant impediments to unhindered global trade are now non-tariff barriers. While UK exporters are working around them, there is a job for government and industry to work together to reduce regulatory barriers to trade and to make the case for global standards loud and clear. There are already some good examples of this. The recently agreed EU-Canada agreement minimises duplication inspections of pharmaceutical manufacturing. And there are already international rules on automotive construction standards which enable car manufacturers to sell their vehicles in many other parts of the world. There has been progress, but much more needs to be done to bring around a global system that is freer and fairer on trade. And the WTO and the G20 have a critical role to play. I hope and I pray that the UK and Spain can continue to be strong partners in this endeavour, because I believe that we do share those values. Because quite simply, what we both know is that trade builds trust. Trust fosters peace. Peace brings prosperity. And prosperity, and from prosperity, we all benefit. Thank you.